Overseas weapons sales by the United States have hit a record high in 2011. The U.S. sold $66 billion worth of arms last year, and that's triple what it sold in 2010. Well, the previous record for the U.S. was $31 billion in 2009. A congressional report says the sales were driven by Gulf countries worried about Iran's ambitions in the region. America's biggest customer by far was Saudi Arabia. All up, the U.S. sold 78% of the world's arms in 2011. Let's bring in Richard Weitz. He's a senior fellow and director for the Center for Political and Military Analysis at the Hudson Institute. He's joining us now from Washington, D.C. It's good to have you with us, Richard. So when you read these figures, what do you think? Weapons sales, as I was just saying, by the U.S., tripled to a record high of $66 billion. That was in 2011. Is that surprising to you at all?
Not really. It's not a mystery what's happening here. As you know, many of the Gulf monarchies, the GCC states, are concerned about Iran's growing potential, possibly at development of nuclear weapons, but certainly its growing missile capabilities, growing conventional capabilities. And the U.S. government and other governments have been trying to figure out how to deal with this issue. And they, as you know, the Obama administration launched a diplomatic engagement effort that did not succeed to Iran. The military option is considered not very profitable, something to be done only as a last resort. So in between, you rely on sanctions, you rely on the cyber attacks, and rely on weapon sales. The advantage of the weapon sale.
Okay, but Richard, let me ask you this. How much of a factor has the Obama administration's efforts to simplify export arms controls played in driving up these figures?
That's a good question. I don't think it's been much of an impact. I think it's really more a question of the demand has been increasing from the local countries in cooperation with the United States. I think the idea is if you sell these countries weapons, that reassures them, so you're less likely to have a confrontation with Iran. It also discourages Iran from trying to seal the Strait of Hormuz. It certainly helps bind the alliance ties with some of these countries. There was some unease when the U.S. military was pulling out of Iraq and reclining Afghanistan, that perhaps the United States was losing interest in the region and moving its forces to the Pacific. And so the arms sales fulfill a number of these functions: reassurance, deterrence, and so on. The loosening of the exports, that's still in a work in progress. That hasn't proceeded so far. So I think it's more demand driven.
Well, the U.S., as we're saying, has supplied $66 billion, topping the list, and then the list lists Russia coming in second place at $4.8 billion. Why is there such a big difference?
Well, historically, it's been much closer. You have to be a bit careful. This congressional study, it looks at it excludes certain types of sales. It focuses only on sales to developing countries, and it's a bit of some of the figures that come out of different sources are a bit different. The Russians claim, for example, that their sales are now running about twice as high as the figures in the congressional citations. But in general, the U.S. has been number one for a while now, with Russia number two. And it's a combination of the American weapons seem to be proving their effectiveness in the Persian Gulf conflict and the conflicts in the Balkans and so on. The U.S. has a lot more allies. The Russian defense industry is still recovering a bit from the breakup of the Soviet Union. People think over time China will be rising up in the figures. It's not quite there yet, but that's coming. But the U.S. is clearly emerging as a dominant seller, and another reason could be that some of these countries, such as the Saudis and the UAE, think that by buying weapons from the United States, that they're almost buying a little security. It increases the likelihood the United States will intervene on their behalf if necessary.
All right, so Richard Weitz, thanks very much for joining us on the Al Jazeera News Hour.